Welcome to week 2 of our series, Goals. Now, we kicked this series off 2 weeks ago, and we started talking about New Year's resolutions. And did you know that after 2 weeks, most people have already given up on their New Year's resolutions? By the end of January, fewer than 25% of people are still committed to their goals. And that's because achieving our goals, it's hard work. They take strength, commitment, perseverance to follow through on our goals. And whatever goals you have right now, I have some good news and I have some bad news. The bad news is if you haven't already, you are going to experience opposition, frustration, and probably a lack of motivation on your way to achieving your goals. The good news is there's hope when your goals are too much to handle on your own. When things get difficult and you feel weak or discouraged, how do you keep pursuing your goals and finish strong? Now, if you weren't here last week, let's get you caught up. So long ago, the city of Jerusalem was destroyed by an enemy army. God promised the Jewish people that they would one day return to Jerusalem. The Jewish people slowly began rebuilding the city, and although people were living in Jerusalem, Nehemiah learned the walls were falling down. Nehemiah wanted to repair the walls to honor God and protect his people. And so for months, Nehemiah prayed and planned and prepared. And so Nehemiah boldly asks the king he was working for to let him repair the walls, and the king said yes. So Nehemiah recruited a team to help, but not everyone was excited about this idea. Now in chapter 3, we read about how once he arrived in Jerusalem, Nehemiah got straight to work. He convinced tons of people to help rebuild Jerusalem and work together and repair the city walls. He divvied up the work amongst the different tribes and according to people's different talents and skills, and they got busy on the repairs. Well, then the opposition came. In Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 1 through 3, here's what we read. Sanballat was very angry when he learned that we were rebuilding the wall. He flew into a rage and mocked the Jews, saying in front of his friends and the Samaritan army officers, "What does this bunch of poor, feeble Jews think they're doing? Do they think they can build the wall in a single day by just offering a few sacrifices? Do they actually think they can make something of stones from a rubbish heap and charred ones at that?" And Tobiah the Ammonite, who was standing beside him, remarked, "That stone wall would collapse if even a fox walked along the top of it." Now let's talk about these guys, these bullies. They called them weak. They mocked the quality of their work. They mocked their pain. They mocked their beliefs. They really tried to crush their hope. And even though Nehemiah and his team were being obedient to God, they still had to deal with the haters, right? Now let's see how Nehemiah and his team handled this opposition and frustration. Here's what it says. Then I prayed, "Hear us, our God, for we are being mocked. May their scoffing fall back on their own heads, and may they themselves become captives in a foreign land. Do not ignore their guilt. Do not blot out their sins, for they have provoked you to anger in front of the builders." At last the wall was completed to half its height around the entire city, for the people had worked with enthusiasm. Now there's so much we could talk about here, but here's what I notice. First, Nehemiah didn't get distracted. He didn't fight with these guys. He didn't add to their drama. He basically said, "Thank you, next," to the haters. Second, Nehemiah took it to God. He asked God to hear his prayers and make it right. And last, Nehemiah kept going. He and his team kept building no matter what those guys had to say. They had already rebuilt the wall to half its original height. And this only made Sanballat and Tobiah even more angry, and so they poured it on. At one point, Nehemiah received a series of terrifying letters and death threats. These men, they didn't want Nehemiah to finish this wall, but watch how Nehemiah reacts in chapter 6, verse 9. He says, "They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. But I prayed, 'Now strengthen my hands.'" Strengthen my hands, Nehemiah prayed. He could have asked God for anything, but he simply asked God for the strength to finish the work. Now, sometimes it seems like our challenges become the most difficult just before we cross the finish line. And that was true for Derek Redmond, a sprinter who was competing in the 400 meter in the 1992 Olympics. Derek planned, prepared, and trained hard, but 250 meters away from the finish line, his hamstring tore. He was absolutely determined to finish the race, so he mustered the strength to get up, essentially to hop to the finish line. You could tell what excruciating pain he was in until someone showed up. It was his dad, who ran down to the track, and Derek put his arm around his father, and they walked across the finish line together. In all seriousness, I can't even show you the video because I would actually start crying. At some point, we're going to face opposition that threatens us achieving our goals. And opposition can feel overwhelming, especially if you're alone. But when you're following Jesus and chasing after what he wants for you, you're never alone. God is with you. God gives you strength. God will even carry you when you can't keep going on your own. A few moments ago, we saw how Nehemiah handled opposition. And now what if we took some of those same tactics Nehemiah used and applied them to our own goals? Do you have one of your goals in mind? Is there something you want to do or become or change, but you're facing opposition? Keep your goal in mind as we think about these 4 things together. When you need strength to pursue God-sized goals, first, take it to God. Nehemiah was in constant communication with God, but this was especially true when he was facing opposition. So when you're struggling with the goals God has called you to pursue, what would it look like for you to talk to God more regularly? What would you ask for? What would you say? Second, choose community. God gives us strength through the Holy Spirit, but God also gives strength through community. We weren't designed to do life alone. And when you're facing opposition and losing strength, what would it look like for you to lean on your community or your small group? Are you surrounded by people you trust? If not, maybe building that community is your first step. The third thing Nehemiah did was rest. Nehemiah asked God for strength to keep going, but he knew he and the rest of his community needed to rest too. We weren't designed to hustle forever, so what would it look like for you to make rest a priority? When you're feeling overwhelmed weak, or tired, what helps you feel rested and renewed so that you can keep going? Is it sleep? Is it time with friends? Is it time by yourself? Or time away from the internet and your mobile devices? The last thing Nehemiah did was he wasn't deterred. Now, when we're following God, not everybody's going to like it. Not everybody's going to support it. And it's not your job to please everyone. The only person you need to worry about pleasing is God. So what would that look like for you? Whose voices do you need to learn to ignore? And whose voices do you need to keep in the forefront of your mind as encouragement to keep going? So what action do you feel God is challenging you to take that requires His strength? Identify the opposition and obstacles. Take it to God. Choose community, leaning into the godly people around you. Rest. Do something that recharges your spirit and your soul, and keep moving forward. God promised that His Holy Spirit would strengthen us. So let's have faith in what the words of God say.